Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. So here we are in the third segment of tonight's first iteration of the initial story proposal. Now, for the last two videos, we have talked with people from all around the globe concerning different aspects of the story. Now, it is time for us to move over into the questions log and take a look at what everybody has put over there. Now, real quick, I see Gavin has thrown in that I was quieter. Hopefully, I'm still sounding all right to everybody out there. It looks like my levels are about normal here. So
yeah, they look like they're right where they're supposed to be.
I'm just waiting to see if anybody else throws anything into the question queue that, says, yeah, we can't hear you or whatever, but... Okay, good. Jim's the man. He said sounds good to him.
And even Gavin says you sound okay.
Okay. So. All right, let's go ahead and get rolling with this. Jumping back up to the top. And, Zach, I'll go ahead and just hand the mouse over to you, make it easier to control. Because a lot of this at the beginning, you'll probably just have to just skip over.
Yeah, it's going to take me a minute to kind of sort out the good stuff from the bad. So I'm just going to steadily go through and just delete out stuff as we see it. So the delete button takes a minute, I suppose.
So for this video, we apologize for the quiet moments there will be, and that's again because we're just digging through the log over here, question log. I want to make sure that we capture as much of this stuff as possible. So the cool thing is those of you that happen to be watching this on a video later can simply fast forward.
Yeah, it's taking me a while to actually find questions that are related, so a lot of people just asking about how the class works, and I think that's all been kind of sorted out over the last few hours. I'm going to try to just scan through. Now, obviously, we didn't want to talk about gameplay. Story element question. What's the life expectancy of your races? You mentioned hundreds of years, just wondering if that's 2 to 4 generations of time, or if people in the various wars are still alive.
And this is George brought this up earlier because he finally got into the to the thing. So did you want to address that now?
Well, we might as well just go. I don't know if we ever really
no, we didn't.
ironed it out. I think generally I would like the life expectancy on both sides to be fairly normal to what we experience now.
Okay.
With the exception of, I like the idea of the necromancers having extreme long life.
So do I. Again, they play with those forbidden powers.
Yeah, and well, that ties into a lot of real cool nastiness with how the certain people among the corporations might suddenly start working with the necromancers to get that kind of power over life and death.
Absolutely.
And that sort of thing. But generally speaking, life expectancy pretty much human standard.
Okay.
So let's kind of just zip through. Again, please bear with me on the quiet times. I'm having to read through a very long list. It's going to take me a little bit of time to go through. Can the Alethians and the Terrans interbreed?
We've already got a section on that.
Yeah, we've got a section on that where really we just kind of mentioned the possibility of there being a third race. I don't think we've actually decided. At first, I'd like to say no for the time being. It keeps things simple just in terms of a game world.
But we're not going to rule it out.
But I'm not going to rule it out.
It has made it into a floating box in the mind map. So it is something that we'll come back to as the story takes stronger shape.
And there's some stuff that was already kind of picked up. Have you thought about time travel? In theory, the Alethians could be an older people since they have died out. So they're both on the same planet but in different periods. Rifts in time, etc. The whole battle versus of future versus legendary people. No, I hadn't thought of that, and I just don't see that working out very well, because then you've got to maintain this constant portal moving back and forth through time. I don't know. I don't see that working out so well, and that's just me. Though, I mean, if you're really adamant about that and you wanted to draft out a much clearer look, and that was Dan Kronholm who asked that, and I should start mentioning names.
Pez.
Then by all means, you could draft out something very clearly presented, and we could discuss it from that point. Let's see. Thomas Lee says, so magic that protects and propel a planet. Oh, okay. We were talking about the launching of the planet, which I think that's been kind of quelled.
Yeah, Gavin.
Sorry, Gav. I just don't. The home run planet thing just doesn't appeal to me like at all.
But think of the T-shirts and the sales.
Exactly.
Anyways.
And there's some a little bit of back and forth about the religious thing, but I think we've already kind of touched on that to a satisfying degree. And guys, if you feel that I have ended up, by the time we're done here, skipping a question that you've written, it's only because I can't read all of these. We would literally be here for hours more. But anything that looks like it's something we've already hit on, I'm gonna skip over in lieu of grabbing something that looks fairly unapproached. Both of the planets could have been in a previous faction war. The corporations versus the rebels in the Mage Wars. Having the planets conflict could leave them in need of a united body. That's true. And I think that's something that will be an underlying theme as we move forward. And I just jumped a little bit. We're really going to have to find a way to do away with chatter here in the question box.
Yeah, we'll get the chat system working.
We talked a lot about the religion of the Terran people and how if we were going to go that route, it would need to be based on consumerism. What about the groups? It's from Andrew Thompson. What about some of the groups consisting of Luddites in the Terran areas? I don't know if I would go that far, but you know, the kind of low-tech style hacker element is certainly has a degree of attraction to it. And then, of course, there's all the discussion of religion. It's kind of cool because we're almost backtracking through all of the discussion we had.
Mm-hmm.
The fascination of technology by the Alethians. For the feudal system, are you, Zach, thinking more along the lines of ancient Europe with the kings, lords, landowners, etc., or more the Roman style with the mage lords being a sort of a senate and one of them being the leader of a sort? Certainly the latter. With the mage lords forming kind of an enclave-style governing body who in turn have designees that... designees, thank you. Governors of a sort. They scatter across the land who report directly to them, and those are kind of where each one of your regions come from. That's how I had pictured it. Just as a way to kind of maintain some form of control in an older-fashioned way that we could easily accept. Could the religion tie into how the United Terran hegemony works? Could they be, say, the leading brand or even a corporation with its zealot followers also really like the idea that the Terrans mistake Alethians for gods? Do the darker, more necromantic Alethians take advantage of this? How could they not? Absolutely. I really can't wait to see how that could just really be exploited. And you have subjugated factions of humans like worshipping and perhaps in after a fashion becoming slaves of the necromancers. Do they know that the Arcanocite is the source of their power, or do they think a force allows it? I don't know why it couldn't be both. I think it would have been noted by now, especially if they've been sending people out to distant worlds, that their powers do start to wane as they get away from the Arcanocite. And so it would become apparent that the crystals have something to do with it. At the same time, you can't just say, well, it's crystals that do it, so our powers have no reverence in terms of where they come from. Why could they not have a belief system in which the crystals themselves were a gift from some other entity? Like God gave us these crystals, and so now we have power. That sort of thing. Sorry to backtrack a bit, but instead of gods have some sort of summons, I don't want to get into the mechanics of summoning things just yet, but I think I see what you're saying. A lot of what has been said requires the need for more defined factions within each empire, and that's true. I think once we get the idea down that we certainly want types of religions, types of corporations, types of sects of belief in the realm of the Alethians, then all of that is going to have to be very heavily ironed out. What we're doing right now is just kind of getting that first stage of iteration taken care of so that we can branch out from there.
That's right.
Dead cyborgs can be controlled by necromancers? Well, maybe after a fashion. We need to know if Terrans can use magic. Would a magic sword work for a Terran soldier? Would an assault rifle work for a peasant wizard? After a fashion, it's going to need to. Because we're going to need melee combat, and a magical sword should, right off the bat, should generally always perform better than a mundane one. But there's ways around that too. I do want humans to be able to unlock magical powers, as we've already kind of discussed through the use of augmentation or drugs or things. So I think that's definitely gonna pop up. Moving along. And I wish there was a possibility to talk to other fellow listeners rather than doing and asking a question form.
That's just going to be getting it.
Yeah, this first meeting is really going to involve a lot of working out the kinks.
Mm-hmm. Oh, the first couple of meetings for sure.
Mm-hmm. We've already kind of talked about pets. How does the Arcanocite in crystalline form integrate with the Alethians, as in how do they use it? Surely this should be looked into. The way I had actually pictured it was, there's a lot of this crystal in and throughout the planet. And, that crystal the original idea, and I think this has kind of been augmented, but it doesn't necessarily have to be the hard and fast rule, but there is kind of a signal, a force, an energy that comes out of this crystal. And so being that close to such a large source of it and evolving with that over time is what has really given them their powers. They're aware of this relationship. And so there is kind of a reverence for this crystal. They know that, but it's not like they have to, snort the crystal, or they have to, roll it around in their hands, or have crystal suppositories or anything terrible like that. So I know that was awful, but it's just the fact that it's there, and it's been in their planet in which they live for so long. Somebody says the Alethians should be much longer lived than the Terrans, thus they would value life and resist change more. I don't know if I necessarily agree with that. I think you can find humans here on Earth that have tremendous love and respect for life. And I think, generally speaking, we as a people, as a human race, have a much greater appreciation for life than we did historically. I wouldn't necessarily just go with that. I like the idea of there being a relatively close relationship in how long lived they are, because that does give the necromancers, who I like the idea of them being very long lived, that gives them kind of a frightening aspect that they've been around all this time. Let's see. Moving right along. We're assuming that the Terrans found Alethea. Why not have Alethea looking for a place without Arcanocite to dump political prisoners, to keep them from using magic to return, and opening a portal to this Earth stand-in? The governments of this world see the portal's source as a fantastic power source and come looking for it to take it. That's why neither side is the good guys. I hadn't really considered that. But I mean, what I had considered, what was in my head generally, was that, on the surface, aside from their kind of fascination with technology, I hadn't really considered the outward deportation of prisoners. Again, I like the underlying thing. Okay, so we go to war with these necromancers and we fight against them because they use these forbidden magics. But not even to our worst enemy would we cut them off from this sacred source of our power. That just isn't done. Even more so than forbidden magic is ripping someone away from that. And that would be a really, really difficult decision. And so I don't see that happening. But that's just my take on it.
Well, they could almost revere the Arcanocite as their soul, as almost a collective soul. So they could look at it as akin to being murderers by cutting somebody off from it. Exactly.
How would it be if the Alethians were kind of atheists? We sort of discussed this, because they have magic. I mean, who really, who needs to explain things by way of a god when you can do pretty much
godlike things?
Godlike things all the time. It becomes kind of a standard. Let's see. The idea of nanites, which are based off of Arcanocite, you could do all kinds of cool things with that. And I totally understand why we've got so many people who have left, but I'm happy to see that the greater majority are still here.
Yeah, it's amazing.
No, this is something Michael O'Brien put a huge post in here, and really it got my attention for its size. But it was something my head was starting to go into when we explored the underground. It was splinter factions from both civilizations banding together, and the first thing that came to mind, of course, were maybe the necromancers. But you go in a lot of different directions. Both splinter factions are very underground in the way they conduct operations, unsure of the size of the groups. They joined together roughly 10 years before the story of the game. New groups still working out internal problems, while each government is aware of the presence of resistance forces due to activities conducted by each of them. Neither is aware of this merging of the two resistance factions. Very secretive. Around the time both civilizations begin to intermingle, the Terran resistance and a similar group of Alethians discover each other through means I have yet to think of. Very difficult to convey a detailed story in a linear format such as this. Hooray for mind mapping. Much the same as the Terran resistance, the Alethian resistance is a small group of people that hate the current government. They are a relatively new group, originally formed sometime between the Great War and the years thereafter. And I think that kind of thing opens up a lot of hope for branching story arcs as you go through through quests. Because I don't really want either side to look like they're completely in complete harmony and unison. Oh, he has more. While the direction of their contempt is aimed at their own governments, their goals are similar enough that they come to an agreement to merge the two forces and work towards their goals. They call themselves Savior. Wow, he's really thought this out.
No, that's awesome.
But I want to... Okay, Michael, you're still here, apparently. Mm-hmm. I want what you've drafted out here in a forum post over in the MMO lounge. Please, because it doesn't need to stay here inside the questions. This is temporary, and will get destroyed, and I don't want to copy-paste it. I'm going to let you do that.
Meaning that Zach really likes what he's reading.
I like this, and I want to be able to reference back to it later, because I know right now I'm just reading it, and off the top of my head, I'm not even sure where I can work this into the mind map, because it still seems it seems kind of beyond the scope of what we're discussing here. There's a lot of story that we don't necessarily have to lock down in order to get started. Mm-hmm. In order to define the world in which we build our game, but is going to be important as we start drafting out things like a quest system and the overall gameplay experience. So I definitely want to hold on to this idea.
I kind of view the entire story that's being put together now, the backstory and all, it's going to be, the backstory is just going to be completely fleshed out. But when we get to the current timeline, what we're defining is going to be a framework. And then when we get into this stuff, these are the plugs that we're going to be plugging into that framework.
Exactly. And so because of that, I want to be able to reference back to your idea, which, I mean, the long and short of Michael's idea, folks, for anybody listening in, is some underground groups that, on both sides, the Alethians and the humans, who come together to a common goal. They're almost like their own free people / terrorist outfit who are trying to overthrow the greater powers on both sides. But yeah, I can definitely see a lot of stories arcing off of that. You could have that magic is based on the essence of things around the casters and artificially created items which have no essence and can interfere with the essence around it. I didn't quite follow that. Where's the historical Romeo and Juliet nobility story? Oh, I'm sure it's in there somewhere.
Oh, Mr. Richards.
There would have to be some kind of authority to deal with legal matters that cross the borders.
Authority is definitely going to end up in this. We have already discussed that quite heavily over the past 10 months.
Yeah.
So just as we had talked about bounties, we've also talked about authority. I just want to toss that out there real quick.
Yeah. Michael, he's still continuing with a lot of his idea of this savior faction,
but it's getting broke up with a bunch of other questions that are getting
Make
injected.
A thread for me so that we can explore this later.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because besides, I'm trying to really kind of questions that are entirely new to the flow of the story are what I'm really, really trying to focus on. Because I think we could indefinitely branch off from this. I think you could take the framework we've got and just go off in a million different directions, and what you've presented is one of that million.
Mm-hmm. But some really nice
stuff.
Some
really, really nice stuff. aren't we applying classes of each race in that? Hang on. Now, like I said, it's very difficult for me to pick questions that weren't already discussed in some form or fashion. So if I sound like I'm mumbling, it's only because I am. Do the necromancers treat their system as a religion? Not sure how to word this, but if it's a religion, it holds one societal niche, where if it's individuals after power, it's another. I like the idea of it being kind of a dark religion, but something very zealously sought after. Where these forbidden magics are the true power. This is where it's really at, and you will follow. I would love it. I would love for them to have their own hierarchy, on their side of the world too. There are those who are really powerful who subjugate those beneath them. Let's see. Moving along. A lot of these suggestions that I'm seeing have been handled in one form or another. I'm a bit confused. Is there a race war or faction within races that are at war with one another? Like, is there 50% Terran and 50% Elethian versus the remainder? Actually, I'm confused by your question. Right now, what I'm looking at is there having been a war simply between the Terrans and the Elethians. That war has more or less died down. There are still some animosities, certainly some hostilities, and there's still a lot of remaining tension that is being dealt with. But right now, is there open conflict between these two peoples? No. I'm sure that there are sub-factions that are trying to promote war, trying to promote that conflict. But they would be like our modern-day classification of terrorists, trying to make trouble where the greater powers would rather you believe that there is none. Let's see. A lot of what's going on in here is also chatting between the two users, too. Or between multiple users, so it's very difficult to pick out questions. Let's see. Yeah, we already talked about biological augmentation and how that could keep things, looking fairly different. So that's not anything we really need to dig into. Yeah, we've already we started to look into sub-factions. I think getting too far into sub-factions again is like launching off in one of the million different directions that we can, where I'd really rather we lock down a solid backstory that gets us up to the point of starting gameplay. Now, and we will have to explore that other end. Where does the story go moving forward? Is there an end game story arc? And there's going to have to be at some point. So, but now you're talking. The conversation now goes from taking multiple hours, which it already has, to taking multiple days straight. Some gameplay questions scattered in there. More people who want steampunk. Lee, you should be thrilled. The suggestion was that steampunk, and I'm just, I don't know why. I like steampunk, I really do, but it's like this adamancy, this constant request that we've wedged it in has actually started to get me to roll my eyes every time I read it now. But the idea is that because steampunk is a little more low-tech, that it may be more compatible with magic. And so now I guess we get into the world of Final Fantasy games. Let's see. How about like a artificial intelligence arcanocite machine thingy? Nice. Kind of like Skynet, but with machines that use magic and guns. They could be immune to arcanocite diseases. Just a thought. And certainly an interesting one. I don't know if I would actually want magic to be able to affect the processing of a program to that degree, but I wouldn't rule it out. It could happen, I suppose. There's somebody once again asking about how death should be handled, and that's something that I think we've touched on well enough.
Even with what's been touched on has been actually quite interesting.
Well, it's probably going to be the way you'd have to do it.
Mm-hmm. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, you don't really have a lot of options. Death has this certain finality to it,
Yeah.
Let's see. We talked a lot about the drug world, so I don't really want to explore that any further. And okay, here, cool. We're making it to our first major break. So there's a lot of stuff we can zip through here. As an implementation issue with the concepts we're discussing, this is Doc Hogan who said this, and I haven't been able to keep track of all the names. Sorry, there's just been too many things to try to read. I think it's pretty important to keep different skills / attributes within similar scopes. Creating a separator implementation for nanotech versus necromancy versus biotech versus this versus that would be a nightmare. Not suggesting that each should be different skin over recycled processes, but not far from it either. And that's a gameplay mechanic that we'll just have to find a way to explain via the mechanics or do away with. I think one of the things that everybody needs to understand here is that while we are trying to lock down the story, I think, personally, you go from story to gameplay, and the two are going to have to influence each other, obviously, but if at some point you have an aspect of gameplay that just cannot integrate part of your story, which is unlikely but possible, then you need to go back and take a look at how you can patch up the story to coincide with your gameplay. But I wouldn't want to restrict the creative process of story development by thinking too much about the gameplay right now.
Right, which is why we just didn't want...
Yeah, I mean, dwell on all the possibilities. In fact, I'll also go ahead and say this, and I think it's already been mentioned earlier on in a more subtle fashion. What we've drafted out here is extremely, extremely ambitious, and doesn't necessarily have to all be presented to the player in one go. In no way do I demand that the player understand all of this in order to be able to engage in the world of our game.
Exactly.
Do we even have to make all of this immediately available to the player? No. These are just the influences that we would like to have in order to get started, and it's entirely possible as we get into development that we look back at this and say, all right, guys, we need to take our primary idea and coalesce it down and simplify it into something that we can get rolling on. But I don't want to think too much about that right now.
Right.
Go ahead and define the entire cosmos, and then if we have to look at a single planetary system, great. So anyway. A lot of people talking about bad. How about exploring who would be the possible bad guys in the present story, which could play back into the previous story of the game, like how the war turned someone to do something X, which at present day is viewed as bad. I think that, to me, what you just said goes back into this mythos of the necromancers, which I realize a lot of the modern history of our game world is taking place here on Alethea. And that's okay to me. I still kind of have this Dune-like relationship with Alethea because Alethea has something that everybody wants. We have the crystal is here, which the Aletheans use for their magical abilities. Of course, the Terrans want it because it's going to be their future fuel supply. So, yeah, a lot of the focus is put here on this territory as opposed to Earth or any of the other colonies. But I'd still like you to be able to visit those as well. I realize I just kind of sidetracked myself, but there you go. I'm allowed. What about making the fringes of these exiled areas also the general prison system of the Aletheans, and maybe a place that infracting PCs get sent to? kind of a Badlands. That could be very interesting. A banishment of sorts for breaking the law if you wanted to exert some authority. You see this in single-player role-playing games from time to time, but you don't really see it in MMOs, where if you do something that is illegal and you get caught or subdued, what if you did literally find yourself in to throw back into WoW terms, like an instance-style environment that you have to fight your way back out of or escape from or do your time and finally get released from.
Right.
Say, you get banished as an Alethian. I got other people messing me up now. You get banished as an Alethian into these outland areas, and maybe it's not even like you just, they just put you out in the wilderness. Maybe you're in kind of like a prison colony in the middle of this area, and you need to fight your way out. Or in terms of the Terrans, you end up breaking the law, and you end up getting caught or killed, because it could just be you lose combat, your player quote-unquote dies. Mm-hmm. And then when you wake up or are resurrected, you're now inside this instance. Yeah, I see that really irritating the living daylight out of certain players. I know that I've read some articles on Blizzard and how it's dealt with death over the years and how that's changed because, the corpse run. The corpse run, if you guys don't know what that is when you die, you got to run all the way back to where your body was. A lot of people hate that. And so that's been really, they've tried to put in, more graveyards so that you can spawn closer to your corpse. And new MMOs have come back saying, hey, we've done away with the corpse run. Don't you love us? And I can really see people getting frustrated to find out, well, I did Action X and I ended up getting killed. And so now, I'm sorry, guys, you go ahead and continue on playing. I've got to spend the next 20 minutes trying to fight my way out of prison.
Sure, but I mean, if it's something like harassing the noobs.
Well, absolutely. Actually, well, here's my take on, and this is twisted, what I'm about to say. Trust me, so don't roll your eyes. But while each and every one of you will probably, in some part, roll your eyes when I say this, some other part of you will go, oh, that's smart. What if you could buy your way out of it?
Okay.
You got a fine. Now, just in the back of your heads, because think as game developers building your own game that you'd like to be profitable in some part. What if gold was an in-game transaction?
Okay.
Now, if you ended up getting put in prison, you deplete some of your gold supply to get in, so it actually ends up, it could end up actually costing you something. But anyway, I don't know, just
tossing ideas out.
Just thinking.
Oh. I don't know, the penalty for, getting busted killing a bunch of lobies is getting thrown into a prison instance with a bunch of people 20 levels higher.
Exactly. Two important questions. Will this mind map be made available as a file? How are we treating the concepts in the mind map license-wise? Is it open for any form of novelization at this point? I may try working on developing some story forms until I can get a Wintel box and get back to C# Dev and Unity. I really don't want this to be a completely open licensed idea. So if you start, but I mean, a lot of the concepts we've got here are so bloody generic, and
right,
end up in the air.
We are still working on our MMO after all.
Yeah. But they're not only generic. I mean, some of these names have. I know we still said Alethians and Terrans, but I still. I mean, we'll probably end up sticking with Alethians, but I'm still not really sold on the term Terran. I'll just say on record, I'm not a real big fan of novelization at the moment. But fan fiction's one of those things you can't stop anyway. So it's one of those things. Let's see. How about seeing this as the mysterious dead time of Earth before dinosaurs, etc.? What if the minerals, etc., as in the old ancient history of the MMO story? I followed the first half of that and not the back half. I think he means turn this into prehistory instead of a future Earth scenario. Kind of like what I'm pretty sure, well, what Battlestar Galactica more or less did. Mm-hmm. But I don't really want to go in that direction. I'd rather this just be futuristic and go from there. Here's somebody said, if we actually keep Earth and we happen to go with the thought of doing away with it, which I think you just contradicted yourself, I highly recommend not to have any parts of the story dealing with let's make our way back to Earth. It's useless and they don't want it anymore, unless the reason they're going back is not to recapture their homeland, but instead to go back for some lost elements of humanity.
Yeah, I definitely wouldn't envision trying to recapture, the planet. It's just more or less destroyed or devastated. At least that's how I see it in my head.
Perhaps interstellar travel is so impractical that colonies like this Terran one were seeded by sleeper ships. And the only thing which allows travel between the worlds is a touch of cooperation between magic and technology. Yeah, but then how would the Terrans have even got here in the first place? And yes, I'm sure you can come up with an answer, but because that's how fiction works. It'd be like, well, we started talking with our minds to the Alethians, and they opened up a portal using their magic wands, and we stepped through. But no, I love the image of the Terrans sending out their ships, whether it be faster than light travel, Gavin, or something that actually took a lot of time, George. And descending down into the atmosphere, landing, making contact, establishing a relationship. That goes south. We have a fight. The fight goes away. I like that. Mm-hmm. I'm in love with that, and I'm gonna fight to keep that. Bum 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 bum. Somebody says, another thought on Arcana site, check out the Malifaux tabletop figurines games based entirely around everything that's been discussed in Arcana site so far. Not a nitpick. I think it works really, really well. Well, good. George actually made an interesting point. He says, Arcanocite is the source of magic. He would not want a justification for Arcanocite. It would diminish the exotic nature of the item and bring it into the realm of science fiction completely. I think he means an explanation of its origin. And this ties back into one of the story arcs we discussed earlier, where there may have been an ancient race that kind of developed or hoarded Arcanocite as a form of weapon or hidden fuel system, that sort of thing. And I like that, too. I think, and this kind of a related topic, one of my favorite science fiction stories, franchises of all time, is the Alien franchise by Fox. And I think the worst thing that has happened to it is that we've come to know the alien far too well. We know way too much about their life cycle, how they behave, what they do. All of you know that, keep them off your face, and if your friends if they get a face hugger, well, you need to go ahead and just plug them in the head and be done with it. But that mystery has made them less frightening and taken away some of their power. And so by not explaining the origins of Arcanocite, you lend it that kind of mythological power. And to explain it too much is to take it away. I mean, we are, just as humans, we are no longer fascinated by things we understand. We're only fascinated by things that we don't.
Right.
Here's an interesting idea. Perhaps magic has serious waste products like technology. The waste products of magic are valuable to a technological society and a magical society. As a technological society and like depleted uranium and mercury. And the best way for both sides to use a lot of magic and technology is to have a long, protracted war. Again, I'd like the war to already be taken care of. Though the idea of depleting these crystals could be an interesting one. Because that's something you could explore later on deeper into the story, is that what if each time an Alethian uses magic, no matter how much, even just the tiniest amount, they are burning up the resources of their planet. They're literally taking the power out of these crystals. They've just never known it, really. And so, that's way out there. Mm-hmm. But what if it was finite? And so you did expend these crystals, and then they become useless, or like some form of depleted uranium. They become like ammunition. We break them up into shards and fire them out of guns, and that may be something worth exploring.
Right.
More stuff on religion. Observation. What's stopping the mage lords or necromancers to mind control the Terrans to do their biddings or just kill them off? Or what about the necromancers mind controlling the Terrans to use them and their technology? Do the Terrans have something to counter off that bat? Well, what if their mind control, which works really well from one Alethian to another, just for some strange reason isn't working so well from the Alethians to the Terrans? That at least quells that question. I don't mind them being able to do it, but what if it is precisely your ability to use magic which exposes you to that kind of power, to that kind of control, which makes the necromancers extremely dangerous on their home world in terms of mind control, but maybe not necessarily as dangerous to humans. I'm not saying they couldn't do it, but it would take a lot more focus. Perhaps something like actual physical or visual contact, where on the planet of Alethea they could reach out to each other through something kind of like ESP and start taking each other over. And I think that ties into a lot of the mythos we've discussed up to this point. And I think we have a repeat. All of these ideas are awesome. However, it seems like implementing all of them would take years of development. I'd be interested in understanding, when it makes sense, how ideas will be filtered to keep the length of the development cycle somewhat reasonable. And that's absolutely something we're going to have to look at.
Sure, but right now, we're only on, technically, day one.
Yeah.
Even with all of this recording, and by the time we're done tonight, 4 hours, so 5, 6, I have over 6 hours of content just discussing, it's just backstory that we're discussing right now.
Well, and none of this, I think, really needs to be filtered out. I think that's kind of a harsh way to look at it, but how much of it needs to be
presented?
Yeah, clearly presented, clearly exposed to the player. That is going to be a picky and choosy kind of thing. But you can have it all there. I mean, it could just be there for no other reason than for folks like Doc Hogan to write a novel about it. There are novels about every majorly popular game out there right now. And some of them are quite good.
Well, the nice thing is it gives us a canon to give to quest writers to draw from when they're designing their little story arcs in the quest chains.
Absolutely.
Some more talk on gameplay, which I'm just not even going to go into. Kind of a what if on if Arcanocite was synthesized on another world and brought over. Something that I think could be explored through questing. Lots of folks going home at this point. I think I'm back to just about an hour ago now. Let's see. Somebody asking about the necromancers having powers that are forbidden but not strictly evil. That's something I very much believe in.
Yeah, we've touched on that.
We've really kind of beat the heck out of that one. And then I think we're back into our second break time now. So lots of silliness and chatter. Can you add a note to the alternate meta timeline? I like it when somebody actually asks me to add a note for something. It's easier to grab onto. Thingy for lost people become humans, possibly with some time travel as part of the transportation process. I really don't want there to be time travel, NATO. I think time travel is, like, even for our story, and our story leverages a lot of cop-outs. I know that. But I think time travel is like the ultimate cop-out, so I'm going to try to avoid that. But I don't really have a problem with something like Terrans exogenesis from either the Alethians, because it was actually brought up earlier, or possibly this super ancient race, which we kind of mentioned here in this proposed meta history. So there, that's actually been handled. You should now be happy, NATO. Be happy. I command it. Are you thinking the game will all take place on the Alethian world? Absolutely not. But as I mentioned, it is kind of a pivotal area. Forbidden powers all seem like very extreme versions of the regular magical powers. I disagree. I think, you know, your death-based powers are kind of their own thing. And even not even so much death, but just the stealing of life, the stealing of the soul, the stealing of life-based elements like someone's blood. I think those all are very different from just being able to control fire or water or air, or you know the ability to fly or levitate, or I don't know, make the earth come up and crush that thing over there. It seems a really, really different thing to me personally. Is there any reason for both Alethians and Terrans to coexist in any planet other than Alethea? If not, is there any reason to even think about or / develop the different colonies any deeper than their names at all? In terms of the game's development, you could argue that. If we need to simplify things, maybe we just keep it all down to multiple realms just on the planet Alethea, maybe on the planet Terra. But not wanting to do that, because there's been a war, because these folks are all trying to work together, it's easy for me to say, well, you know, in their negotiations post-war, they start saying, well, we have colonies here who could use your help with your magics to aid us, so may we send an envoy, you know, can you send an envoy of Alethians to help us on this Terran colony? Where they say, absolutely, and we have, you know, colonies out here that could really use your technology. So how about you set up a sub-colony out there and we start to try to work together? I really would like it if there was a driving force that was trying desperately to bring people closer together. Whether or not it's working or whether or not it'll ultimately be successful, that's still kind of up in the air. But strides are being taken. And let's see. Might be handy to explain why we're focusing away from gameplay at the moment. I don't think it's been explicitly committed to VTM, yet some people may not have got why. Just my 2 cents. I think we were very clear about that. I think if you missed it, it's just because you missed the beginning of the meeting. And I also think if you don't understand why we're trying to avoid it, then you just haven't thought it all the way through. Because we could literally be here for weeks.
Yeah. Is that Gavin?
That's Gavin.
Causing trouble.
Yeah, I just... Let's see. Can the hackers create an AI that can control a biomachine that can use Arcanasite? Sure. No, that's like, wow, there's so many branches. Can this guy do this thing, which it's like we just built Mousetrap in my head. Since it's a machine, it can negate magic and be controlled by the hackers. This AI machine could turn on them, aka Skynet from the Terminator, and be the real-world enemy. I really don't want to have an AI that's trying to kill everything. That's one of the things that I think really has been done to death and death and death and death and death and death and death over and over again. I'm not saying we can't have some sort of NPC that really is an AI that is manipulating things behind the scenes, but I really don't want it to be the ultimate enemy. And that's just me. Mm-hmm. I'm fine with somebody saying, no, absolutely, let's have a
or that
big
hackers
AI.
Could take advantage of their skills utilizing some sort of device that can cause harm to others.
Sure. And really, if I was going to go the route of hackers dealing with an AI in any way, what I think would be a great form is, think of the hacker mentality. Especially in terms of a computer world that you completely experience, that you literally put yourself into and you live in. Now, picture yourself in this other world, because it really is almost like another plane of existence where a new form of life, an artificial form of life, has suddenly appeared and has made itself known. If you really were a zealous follower of the technological world, how could you not worship that? How could that not be beautiful? Now, as an AI, if you understand this nature of humans to worship something that you do not understand, how could you not take advantage of that?
That's true.
So, anyways, what else do we have? I think that's really that's the end of it. How about a rogue Alethian organizing the Necromancer comeback? I think we've already kind of talked about that sort of thing. So, yeah, we're already to the end of the list. Are there any other questions that haven't been addressed at this point? I know I skipped over a lot of stuff. A lot of stuff was chatter. a lot of things that I saw were at least in some way related to what had already been discussed, and so I intentionally skipped over those. But if I skipped over something that you really wanted answered, go ahead and put it in now, and when I see it, I'll just say, look, I think we've already handled that. Have you considered a third playable faction? Several times throughout this discussion, actually. Be it by way of the Necromancers or by way of a third race, this kind of starfaring. We've discussed several different things. I think in terms of overall balance, it is easier if you can narrow it down to left versus right. It doesn't have to be black versus white. It can be red versus blue, But if you have two things, it's easier to balance one versus the other. Where I think if you bring in a third thing that can fight against the other two, I think the amount of work that you put in front of yourself doesn't just multiply by a third time. I think it goes up several exponential degrees of difficulty. So let's see. Have you considered the story arc that players are playing through could also include some corporations colluding with the third common enemy or the Alethians? Please use punctuation. To get some sort of advantage, sell more weapons, wipe out other corporations.
I thought we've actually...
I think we've already kind of beat on that.
We've talked on that a few times.
Yeah, I mean, because we already talked about the corporations kind of colluding with, say, the Necromancers
exactly.
To gain advantage.
Mm-hmm.
Did someone cover if there was going to be a traitors to each faction, i.e. Terrans helping the Alethians or vice versa? Well, I want them to be working together, so that's not necessarily traitors. To each faction. Again, I want the underlying theme of, look, we've had our differences. We are trying to work together. And the real traitors are those who just refuse to accept that and are instead fighting against that common ground. Full stops are the enemy. Yes, apparently they are, Glenn. But the occasional use of a period or even a question mark when asking a question could be very, very useful for someone reading your work. I like the idea of Arcanicite being organic as opposed to synthetic. I don't necessarily have a problem with that. Though if I was going to change it over from something mineral-based to something organically based, I'd probably go with something more like a spore that comes from a particular plant than just let it be, something that effuses through all of the plant life on the planet. I think that's just way too much. Keep it narrowed down to a specific thing that we can actually look for and identify and say, that's where our Arcanicite comes from. Just please, let's not make it come from worms that crawl through the ground. What is the main story goal that the player or players is trying to focus on? Right now, really what we're focusing on is backstory.
That's right.
Meaning that what you suggest will come as we move forward from this point. When you post these vids, can you make a specific discussion and question thread? I think we're probably going to have to. But it's highly likely, Chris, that it's just going to end up getting scattered across that forum. And I don't mean this in any kind of a disrespectful way to anybody listening or watching this video later on, but it's a lot to assume that people are just going to keep their questions to a single thread and take the time to seek out that thread. Somebody will invariably just have a question, go into the forum, click new post, and just blithely type out their question without putting it in a proper form. It's just the way it goes. The main goal of each race is what Russell was getting at earlier with what we're moving toward. And again, that's something that we're going to, I think, move toward once we get the backstory ironed out. Would the Arcanist become the form of currency? Arcanicite, thank you. I guess would Arcanicite become a form of currency, would you think? I would say not. Now, it's not to say you couldn't buy the stuff. In fact, that'd probably be a really cool way to go about it. But I actually want there to be a form of currency. In fact, that may be an interesting way to start tying the two races together. One of the olive branches, if you will, in bringing them together was to decide that they could start trading with a common form of currency. And so you just define that and you go. What about non-playable other races that play a lesser part in other worlds, give other worlds atmosphere? I think that's useful in its own way, but I don't necessarily want to really populate the cosmos. I don't want. I mean, right now, it's easy for us to imagine there being just one other alien race. It's just because right now, okay, in human times right now, we don't know of any other aliens out there that are trying to contact us. And so one is overwhelming enough. And that's kind of how I want this to have taken place. We discovered this other race, and it was absolutely amazing. And we went down and established contact. Not that, oh, well, we've been seeing aliens for years, and here's just another one that turns out we could talk to and had something we wanted. It brings things a little bit into our modern understanding of aliens as opposed to jumping out into Star Trek and Star Wars land. Let's see.
And we will make sure to post the mind map.
Yeah, the mind map will get posted. No worries about that. Did you think about how far the future of the game present will be? Just distant enough that I don't want to think about it too hard.
Yeah, far, far future.
Yeah. We need to make the Terrans more appealing. I'm totally being drawn toward the Alethian race, and I think that's just a totally personal thing because really I don't give two licks about playing as an Alethian, and that's as a developer, and that's horrible for me to say. But I really do find myself really, really drawn to the technological aspects of the Terrans, personally. I think it was Gavin who said the planets getting hurled next to each other or something like that. Well, if Terrans were experimenting with wormholes and had a bad experience and shot the planet across the galaxy in the Alethian solar system, just an idea. I don't want planets to move, guys. I really...
But I just feel that's a really cool idea, though, with the experimenting with wormhole technology.
But
Whoops.
Yeah, it's like, but I can't...
You're playing interstellar pool now.
I have such a hard time imagining that resulting in anything other than pure cataclysm. Everybody's now dead.
Well, it's such a fine line that balance where that planet has to be in relation to a star.
We opened
to happen.
Exactly. We opened a wormhole to that exact point that moved our planet into just the precise orbit where we could still live and not immediately die. I'm thinking about things you would fight, like what animals would be on the Alethian world. I think that's really a design element.
Yeah, we will come to that.
Yeah, just as there are a lot of creatures on Earth, I expect there to be a lot of creatures on Alethea too.
Ecosystem meetings.
Yeah, so there's a lot of things that will have to be discussed that have nothing to do with the story. Oh, LHC causes Switzerland to move to Alethea. Fantastic. Let's just shut down the Large Hadron Collider now.
Yeah, just... Again, guys, just remember, this is just only day one. We're just working on the backstory right now.
Though, folks, I do want to go ahead and just put in kind of a 5-minute warning on putting in new questions. We're right at about an hour now, a little bit less, and so by putting in a 5-minute warning, we get to kind of round this off to a nice hour session. So if you have any other questions you'd like to get in, please squeeze them in over the next couple of minutes as we are about to go ahead and start closing things down.
Yeah, and I've got to do the Unity release first, and then I need to get the...
It'll be coming tonight.
The application release, and then I will get these encoded, but there's going to be, 4.5 hours of content probably.
Yeah, it may end up being tomorrow morning before people start seeing them.
These two videos. I'll do the best I can.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that's all you can do. Having multiple planets on either side makes the game so huge. If someone could fly to other worlds, a lot of this world fought out in space with huge ships. Are we talking about a single planet on which everyone is fighting over resources, right? Okay, yes and no. What I've got in my head, really, to keep things fairly simple, but to still give variety in terms of environment, is yes, we are going to have multiple planets, but those, I don't necessarily want you to be able to explore the entire planet. I don't want you to be let's jump to this other world colony, and then I'm going to set out and go east until I run back into this colony once again. I don't see any need for that. There can be specific boundaries of exploration on any one of these planets just to help us limit the scope to a certain faction. Now, with, of course, let's say this does end up taking off and becoming successful. There's no reason why you can't expand from there. But having those colonies that you can explore, I think, is an important means of branching out and making the world feel bigger without it necessarily becoming overwhelming. I mean, just to clarify, I'm not necessarily expecting you to be able to explore every inch of Alethea either. That's irresponsible. Is there a sort of set-in-stone date that we are going to say, okay, we have enough story for now, let's move on to other systems or whatever else? I'd like to have all of the story ironed out by Probably what, this week?
Yeah, I was actually shooting for this week, having all of the backstory completely wrapped up.
Yeah. Jason, you skipped my apology for asking you to explain why we're not doing gameplay. You literally did go back over it as I hit enter.
Okay.
Okay, Gav. We also said it first thing when we walked into the room.
We did.
My question would be then, wouldn't it be easy for the Terrans to just bombard from space? And absolutely, it would. But again, I don't... You're going back over to the mentality that, yeah, sure, all of the humans would just mutually agree to that. And I don't want humans to be an evil, conquering race that came from the stars and started obliterating. There's still some humanity there. I don't want to have to kill all of you, but I'm willing to, and so that's why we ended up with, a limited form of peace. Dan, I'm really sorry if you ask a question. I'm probably going to read it out loud. It's just, it's unfair for you and I to have a private dialogue when I can't have a private dialogue with anyone else. So because of that, not only am I going to read it out loud, but I'm going to mention that you mentioned me. I shouldn't do that. That's ridiculous. And I say that with all due respect. I'm not upset or anything, but I can't do that. It doesn't make any sense in a classroom environment. And surely you know that. If you have something you want to say to me privately, send me a PM.
As he now reads it quietly.
I was seeing it because there was another question, and the question was, what about the beer? We'll get to that. Let's see, Zach. I realize you're not at all hooked on the idea of a third playable faction, but please consider all the benefits. Fine, as long as you consider all of the dangers. In my opinion, the rewards far outweigh the added limited time. Please see my points for and against in a thread, a third faction by me in the MMO Lounge. And I'll certainly take a look at that. But development, I think, right off the bat, my first impulse, my gut response, is you are already disregarding the difficulty of balance. Because balancing two playable factions in a gameplay manner such that one is not significantly more powerful than another is a serious problem, because a lot of people who play these kind of games don't care about the story, don't care about what they look like, and don't even care about their abilities. They just want to be the most powerful thing. You see it all the time in WoW. Somebody makes some post on some forum that gets backed up that says, you know what, rogues are now the most powerful race in the game, and suddenly there's a gigantic influx of rogues. Everybody rolls a rogue. I don't want to see that happen. I'd like to keep things as balanced as we possibly can. So now if you take all of the work of trying to keep things balanced and you add a third element into it, that's why I don't say, you don't multiply your difficulty by 3, you put it up exponentially. That's just my immediate gut response, though. So I'm still going to read your posts. All right, Phil is beating this to death, so he says, maybe the Alethian and Terran scientists come together and created some type of teleport machine thing that would help for getting around. Yes, you are beating it to death. We can find a way to get from one planet to the next, but I totally see where you're coming from. We are going to need an instantaneous form of travel. You don't want players to get tied up in moving from point A to point B through space. We don't have any sort of time discontinuity. So yeah, in the end, I was totally expecting there to be some form of teleportation that has been developed perhaps in tandem with magical forces and technological forces. So it's actually a good thing. You're not necessarily beating it to death. You're just exploring it. But I'm gonna pick on you anyway because you're still here. Let's see. If the Terrans bombard the Palnet from the planet from space, they obliterate the magical crystals they want. Or they could. They may not. I mean, if the crystals themselves weren't volatile, it's just as easy to say that they could just pick them out of the debris. Yeah. Is there any sort of economy on Alethea? They're a civilized race. Of course there's an economy. There has to be. It's not as corporately materialistic in its nature as the Terrans, but there would have to be something there. None of the 4 groups we have currently is going to want the exact same thing as any of the other 3, so that's about 15 combinations of teaming up to fight already. Thank you, Gavin. 4 groups being the government and rebels of each one. So he's really there with the number crunching.
Well, of course he is. He's supposed to be. And you're going to answer this last one, and then that's going to be it, since we've now gone hour and 4 minutes.
Are the Alethians using magic in their everyday life, or is it just used for fighting? I want that to permeate every part of their society. they don't even think about it anymore. And I was actually pretty sure that was covered in our very first video yesterday. So that's it.
Okay. Well, that makes for an interesting afternoon. And, well, at this point, here's the way I see this. I want for us to read over everything that's been put in the forums in regard to suggestions and ideas. And then I would like for us here to refine this. And then once we get things refined into its next iteration, then let's do another session with everybody and share where all of these ideas that have come in, where we've taken it to.
Mm-hmm.
And we'll,
I do want to throw this out there, please. If you have thrown out an idea that we have incorporated, please understand with the number of people in here, with the number of ideas that have been slung around, we may not go like, well, this person suggested this. We may not be able to remember who tossed what into the pot. So I beg you, please don't get offended if we don't call you by name and pat you on the back as we use your idea.
Though you can make a post and say, cool, I said
exactly. I mean, if you want to jump in it and claim responsibility for it, by all means, go for it. But I will not be able to remember who said what. I've already forgotten.
But we have a lot of stuff to digest, reorganize, and put together. So, I mean...
Oh, yeah, reading.
And Chris just made another really good point. Also, don't be offended if your idea gets cut.
Yeah, absolutely.
In fact, I'm sure a lot of my ideas are going to get cut before the end of all this.
My ideas get cut constantly.
I'm surprised that so many of my ideas are still intact after this session. Because did you notice that everybody was here just augmenting and not necessarily pruning?
Yeah, for the most part, yeah. Lee, what were you saying?
I don't know. I forgot.
Okay. Very good, very good.
Fair enough.
We've been sitting here for too long.
Yeah, it's been a very long day. But I got some videos that I need to get up for you guys so that you can start downloading them and go learn some cool stuff. And we probably need to eat a little dinner ourselves. Really like to thank everyone that was able to attend tonight, and those 44 of you guys that are still out there. Wow, just dedicated troopers. I am so impressed. Guys, anything else to say?
No, it's like, thanks for all the suggestions.
Oh, absolutely. Really appreciate all of the feedback.
I hope nobody got offended at any time when Zach, myself, or anybody gets really passionate about ideas, or, I mean, that happens. And you're going to hear that happening a lot when we start getting into development, because it seems like coders really get passionate about their ideas.
I don't mind telling people straight out of the gate that I don't like an idea that you pitch. And you're just going to have to kind of deal with that. I am not the kind of guy to just blow sunshine at every idea and say, oh, that's great. Maybe we'll do that. If I think something destroys a critical element of the story, I'm going to say so, and I'm going to squash it quick. Yeah.
But anyways, again, giant thanks, guys. This was absolutely awesome. I look forward to doing it again this week, and I will put a notice up in the lounge. Let's keep this class jamming. Again, we have the potential in front of us to have one of the most awesome classes ever held on the internet. So let's make history here. Well, with that, that's going to wrap up this session, and bye, everyone.